Hi everyone. So we're continuing with the cardiovascular system, moving on from the heart, which we did last time, into the blood vessels, and then we're going to talk about blood. So let's get right into it. For the blood vessels, the two major types of blood vessels, we have arteries. Arteries go away from the heart, so I kind of remember that because A goes to A, so arteries away, that's why they're called arteries. And then as they travel away from the heart, they'll turn into arterioles, which will feed into capillaries, which are the small, tiny little tubes that feed the tissues. And then those capillaries will feed into venules, and then veins bring it towards the heart. So arteries away from the heart, veins towards the heart. And just to review for the heart, remember that if arteries are going away, which type of chambers of the heart are they going to be connected to? The ventricles, because ventricles pump out, and then veins, what would veins be then connected to? Veins are going to be connected to atria, or atrium if it's singular, and that's because atria receive. Okay, so veins towards, arteries away. Let's look at the structure of the blood vessels. This is true for arteries and veins. So we'll talk about what makes them similar, and then I'll talk about how they look different. So for both arteries and veins, they have three tunics. And a tunic is just another way to say a layer. Okay, so three layers. The innermost layer is called the tunica intima. Intima as in intimate, as in very like in there. Okay, so and that is made up of a endothelium layer, which is a simple squamous epithelial layer, and with a little bit of connective tissue underneath it. And the purpose of that is that those simple squamous cells fit nice and neatly together like a snake skin, and they make it so that there's a nice smooth barrier between the blood and the blood vessels. So that helps to reduce the friction that the blood experiences against the walls of the blood vessels. Okay, so that's the tunica intima, very, very small layer, just one single layer, simple squamous epithelial cells, and then a little bit of loose areolar connective tissue underneath that. And then in the middle here is the tunica media. Tunica media, there should be an A there, I don't know why there isn't. Tunica media, media as in medium, as in middle, okay? And in there, we have two different types of tissues. We have dense elastic connective tissue that is for stretching, okay, lots of changes in pressure so that the blood vessel can stretch as the blood is pumped into it. And then we also have smooth muscle, and the function of the smooth muscle is to contract to constrict it, that's called vasoconstriction, or relax to dilate it, that's called vasodilation, and that helps to regulate the amount of blood flowing to any particular part of the body, right? So if, for example, we talk about the parasympathetic nervous system, it helps to increase blood flow to the digestive system, so it would do so by dilating the blood vessels that lead to the digestive tract. Okay, and then we have the tunica externa, and the tunica externa is going to be on the very, very outside, and this is just a layer for protection, protecting the outside of the blood vessel. Okay, so the arteries and the veins both have those three tunics, those three layers. Now let's look into how they're different. So arteries and veins differ because arteries are connected to the heart, and as the heart is contracting, it's squirting a bunch of blood into the arteries at once. And so the arteries have to withstand great changes in blood pressure, right? So they go from the heart is relaxed, so lower blood pressure, and then the heart contracts and this big spurt of blood goes into them. And so they have to withstand a lot of pressure. And because of that, they're going to have structural differences to help withstand that pressure. Whereas the veins, by the time it's gone through the capillary beds, most of the pressure has already been lost. So they don't need to withstand as much pressure. So they're going to have different structural differences. They'll also have structural differences. Okay, so let's talk about the arteries first. So when we look at this picture right here, this one right here with a very thick wall that is the artery, and this floppy one with the thin wall, that is a vein. Okay, so generally in the body, the arteries are going to be nice and solid because the walls of the arteries are bigger, and the veins, they're kind of floppy because their walls are very thin. And I'll show you that in just a sec. So the reason the walls are thicker is if you look at this right here, what they've done for this picture, if they stain it so that the elastic tissue is red. And so which tunic had the elastic tissue in it, the dense elastic connective tissue? That would be in the middle layer, which is called the tunica media. Okay, the tunica media, which is this one, all of this right here. Okay, so you can't see the tunica intima, by the way, because the tunica intima is simple squamous epithelium, just a little bit of connective tissue underneath that. So it's very, very, very thin. So most of what you're looking at right here is the tunica media, and you'll notice that it's much, much thicker for the artery than it is for the vein, and that allows the artery to stretch outwards when all that blood is forced into it. Okay, so the veins will have thin wall because they have a much thinner tunica media. The other thing is, because the veins are low pressure, they also have structural characteristics to help them return the blood to the heart despite the low pressure. And one of them is the fact that they have this extra large lumen. Now let's talk about what the word lumen means. Lumen means the hollow part of any organ. So it's a common term, a broad term that refers to any hollow part of any, like the empty space inside any hollow organ. So you could have a lumen of the digestive tract, like in the small intestine. You'll have the lumen in these blood vessels. Lumen just means empty space inside of an organ. Okay, so this lumen here is much bigger for veins than for arteries, and that's because that extra space helps keep the blood, enough of the blood flowing back towards the heart. And then the second structure that is important to understand to help return the blood to the heart is valves. Arteries have no valves, veins have valves. And what that valve does is, as the blood is milked back towards the heart by our skeletal movement and by the draw of the thoracic cavity through the blood pressure changes, it can't return back down, right? So if the blood is able to make it to this area here, the valves help prevent it from flowing back down. Okay, so blood will just move up in little squirts up through the valve. The valve catches it, and then it'll move up again, catches it. So it just makes sure that the blood is only flowing in one single direction towards the heart. Okay, so the veins also have to have their special characteristics to help with their low pressure. Okay, I just wanted to show you what arteries and veins look like inside bodies. So this is coming out of a cadaver here. These kind of lumpy structures, those are kidneys. And so what we're looking at are renal arteries and veins. Okay, so one thing that I'd like you to understand is, because the arteries have such thick walls, when you look at the blood vessel and take the blood out, they remain their shape, right? So they'll be round like a rope, is what I used to call that when I did cadaver work in classes. So they are nice and solid. Whereas the veins are very loose and floppy because their walls are so thin that when you take the blood out, they just collapse on themselves. So they tend to be flat like ribbons. Okay, so what I want you to notice is, look at this right here. So this is the right renal artery. It is nice and round. And this right here is the right renal vein. So this one is round, but this one is flat. But notice the difference in size. So both of them are going, so this one is supplying blood to the kidney, and the vein is taking the blood away from the kidney. But the right renal artery is much smaller than the vein. And that's because, remember, the veins are going to be bigger because they have that extra large lumen to help accommodate for the low blood pressure in the veins. Okay, let's talk about capillaries real quick. So here we have our arteries. Our arteries are going to be branch and branch and branch into smaller and smaller arteries until they eventually create arterioles, which are basically just very, very small arteries. And then those arterioles are going to feed into capillary beds, and they're called capillary beds because they create these networks with each other. Okay, so you'll notice it's not just like one little thing coming off of the artery. These capillary beds are these full-on networks of blood vessels. And the purpose for that is the more different little tubes you can create, the more surface area you can create. And the more surface area, the greater the amount of exchange between the blood and the tissues. And this is how you can make it very efficient to give oxygen and nutrients to the tissues, and so that makes it so that they have much easier access to those things that they need. Okay, the other thing that helps with exchange is the fact that those capillary beds are very, very thin. Instead of having those thick layers, they don't have any tunica media, they're just the tunica intima. So they just have simple squamous epithelium with a little layer of connective tissue surrounding it for protection. Right? So very, very, very thin, makes it very easy for oxygens and nutrients and carbon dioxide to pass through those the cell walls of those simple squamous epithelial cells. Okay, so it's very good at its job, and its job is exchange between the blood and the tissues, and it does that by increasing the amount of surface area, much more tubes, lots of little tubes, and making it so that the blood vessel wall is very, very thin, so the nutrients and oxygen can pass right through it. Okay, so why are the arteries and the veins different? Okay, so you should know how they're different, but you also need to know why are they different. And it has to do with pressure. Arteries are connected to the heart, and therefore they have to withstand a lot more pressure because all that blood is going to be contracted and forced into them, and then they have to stretch out with all that extra pressure. That's why they have the thicker tunica media. Whereas the veins are trying to bring blood back to the heart, and so they're going to be very low pressure. And so in order to make the blood still keep flowing, they have to have a large lumen, and they need those valves to make sure that as the blood is going through, it can't go back down. It makes it so the blood only flows in one direction. Okay, that's enough for now. We're moving on to the arteries next.